Hello and welcome. My name is Faz Kareem with Learnit, and this is Excel Advanced using Excel 2019. I bet you're wondering what this class is going to cover, so I'm going to go ahead and let you know. In this course, we're going to go ahead and cover the advanced functions of Excel, meaning we're going to go ahead and cover the count if function, the average if, learn how to add our own error codes onto our functions using if error, as well as learn some text functions to manipulate text within cells. And once we get a grasp on all these concepts, we're going to go ahead and dive into some tools Microsoft Excel has to offer, known as the what if analysis tools, and go through an example of each one of those. And once we get a handle on all that, we're going to end this class off with learning how to add the developer tab to Microsoft Excel's ribbon interface, learn how to record our very own macros, which is just a simple set of computer instructions so that you can automate common tasks. This sounds exciting? It's because it is. I'm looking forward to teaching this to you. Hope you're looking forward to learning it. Stay tuned, guys and gals. And just to let you know, this course is designed to be an interactive course. There will be times in this course that I'll ask you to pause your screen and go ahead and fill in these cells, or stop the video and try it with me, or just follow along with me if you have two monitors. Hey everybody, it's Baz here. Now before we begin, just make sure that we have the sample file provided for this class. And if you've yet to grab that, just pause the video and go ahead and grab it, and make sure once you open it up, you are on the if function sheet and you'll be ready to go. All right, hopefully everyone has that sample file in front of us. And if you do, we're currently on the if function sheet, so make sure we go to that sheet. Now that we're on the if function sheet, I want to let you know that Microsoft Excel is a tool to analyze data. You have a bunch of data and you want to pull some answers from it. You use Microsoft Excel to do that. There's a bunch of great tools to analyze that data set. Now on the if functions sheet, I have a data set here. It's actually the pair company sales for February of 2019. I have some salespeople here and I have some totals over here, and I have their week 1 through 4 sales. And from this data set, I would like to derive the total amount of sales the company had in February, and the average amount of sales, or what's the largest sale? What's the smallest sale? And then after that, I want to figure out how many sales we had in the month of February total, which is known as the count of sales. Microsoft Excel has a bunch of functions to do that, as you know, except there's ways you can use this software that can really slow you down, and there's certain tools that you can use to make yourself more efficient. For example, let's go ahead and fill in this data just as an average Excel user by using this data set here. So I want to find the total sales, average, max, min, and count. Well, how I'm going to do that is I'm going to use Excel's function library. So I'm going to use the sum in this cell. Let's all go ahead and go to F12 and type in equal, and then type in sum. And then if you hit the tab key on your keyboard, it will fill in the rest of the sum function for you if you have it highlighted in that drop-down list. Now that we have the sum function inside of a cell, let's go ahead and highlight this chunk of cells we would like to analyze and find the total of. Week 1 through 4. And I'm going to close the parenthesis and hit enter. And now this time I'm going to do the average of the cells. I'm going to find the average function by typing in equal average and hitting tab to autocomplete it. And once I have the average in there, I'm going to go and do the same thing once more and grab that same chunk of cells that I was referring to in the cell above. I'm going to close the parenthesis and hit enter. And this time I want to find the biggest cell out of all that data set. So I'm going to use the max function. So equal max, tab to autocomplete. Once again, I'm going to have to move my hands away from the keyboard. I'm going to grab that same chunk of cells. I'm going to close my parenthesis and hit enter. Great. Let's go ahead and do that for the min. See the smallest cell that we had? Type in equal min, hit tab, and then move your hands away from the keyboard. Ooh, it's our 4th time there. And I'm going to close my parenthesis once I have that range highlighted and hit enter. Alrighty, the last one, the count. Let's see how many sales we had total in the month of February. Type in the count function. I'm going to drag this chunk of cells. I'm going to highlight that range for the 5th time. I'm going to close the parenthesis and hit enter. Alrighty, now that we did that, and if you were following along and filling in these cells, let's all go ahead and highlight the cells we just filled in. Give it a right click. and let's clear the contents. Because I like to believe Microsoft Excel lives by a quote by Goodman Abe. And the quote goes like this: "If you give me 5 hours to cut down a tree, I will spend the first 4 sharpening my axe." So Microsoft Excel has some tools to sharpen your axe. And what I mean by that is when we're diving into this task here, we already knew that we kept having to refer to this chunk of cells. So when we had to go back over and over again and highlight this chunk of cells, and then go back and do it again with another function, that was a pretty tedious and repetitious task that we did 5 times. Well, Microsoft Excel has a function that allows us to just get this chunk of cells here and maybe give it a name, so that way we don't have to sit there and manually drag that range of cells in every function we need to use. This is actually known as naming your ranges. Now we got that concept, let's go ahead and hover over to our Formulas tab to where we can go ahead and name our ranges. I'm going to go ahead and give it a click. And I want to expose you to the Define Names command group, where the Name Manager can be found. Now, the Name Manager is a tool that we can use to name a certain range of cells. So now that we know where it is, let's all together highlight that range of cells once that we want to name. And once we do this, be sure to highlight just week 1 through 4, because if you were to get the totals, you would have doubled up the values in this data set, because that is a calculation column in itself. So just week 1 through 4, have it highlighted. And once you have it highlighted, hover over to your Formulas tab and give the Name Manager a click. Alrighty. Now that you have the Name Manager dialog box open, let's go ahead and close it out really quick. And instead hit the combination of the Control key and the top row F3 key. Just want to let you know that Control F3 will also open up the Name Manager. And you can use this to go ahead and create a named range in your workbook by hitting New. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to move this to the side, hit New. And with naming your ranges, there's a certain set of rules that I want you to know about when naming the range. You're not allowed to have a space inside of the name. It will be considered 2 names. So you can use underscores to add in the space. And you're also not allowed to go past 255 characters. And you can't name a named range an already existing name. It will confuse the software. Now, a good tip is to start out with a keyword like the, just so we can have a consistent drop-down list of name ranges, all starting out with the word the, once we need to fill them in. So I'm just going to go ahead and call this the, and I'm going to put sales, and I'm just going to capitalize the second letter to let me know that it's another word. And because I had the chunk of data highlighted over here, it already found the data set here. And you can go ahead and put an optional comment describing the range. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. And you can just go ahead and hit OK. Let's go ahead and hit OK here. Alrighty. And just like that, we have a new named range called the sales with a certain set of values in it. It's actually these values. And once we check that, I'm going to go ahead and close this window and start using that new named range. Close. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to F12 and let's see how this task works this time. I'm going to do equal and type in sum. Hit the tab key. This time I'm not going to move my hands away from the keyboard. I'm just simply going to type in the. Oh, there's my named range. I'm just going to hit tab. And then I'm going to close my parenthesis. And now for the average, I'm going to do the same thing. Equal average. Once I see it, I'm going to hit tab. I'm going to type in the. And I'm going to tab into my named range. Close my parenthesis and hit enter. Go ahead and pause the video and try using your named range for the max sales, min sales, and the count of sales, and come right back. Alrighty. Hopefully we all had no issue filling in the max function, the min function, and the count function using that named range that we did in the previous video. Another pointer or another tip I want to show you about named ranges that might be useful is the fact that besides you being able to use it to enhance the speed of your functions and formulas that you just filled in, like we did here, it also can be used as a navigation feature to go back to this chunk of cells when you're in a different sheet in the workbook. And just to show you this, let's all go ahead and click on any of these sheets that you see down here, just as long as it's not the if function sheet, to go away from this chunk of cells. I'm going to go ahead and choose the database functions sheet, give it a click. Now, if you need to go back to that chunk of cells, and let's say you have a bunch of sheets, you don't really remember where it is, but you do remember the name of it. I want to remind you all that you have a name box right next to the formula bar. After class, try out the mimosas. They're pretty good. That's just an Excel joke. But the name box shows you the name of the current cell that you're on. But it also has a drop-down arrow right there. Go ahead and give it a click. It will actually show you the named range that you just built. And if you go to it and give it a click, you can take yourself to that worksheet with that chunk of cells, like so. So it's used as a navigation trick as well as a tool to enhance the speed of your formula and function writing. Pretty cool. I'm currently on the if function sheet on the sample file provided in the class. Be sure to go ahead and grab that file and come right back if you've yet to do so. Alrighty. Now that we learned about some name ranges in the previous videos, let's go ahead and dive into some other functions that Excel has to offer. So, was the goal met in column H here? Let's go ahead and see if it was met. We have 36,000. Up here we have a monthly goal of 34,000. So they did meet their goal, except that we have several salespeople. It would be a very tedious task if we had to answer each one of these questions manually with a yes and no. How this is supposed to be asked, or how I like to say it in my head, is if this cell is greater than or equal to this cell, the goal was met, so the answer is going to be yes. If this cell is greater than or equal to this cell, and it so happens to be less than this cell, I want the answer to be no. Now, when I said both of those statements, the word if came out of my mouth. That's because Microsoft Excel has a function known as if that lets you to determine an answer based off a true or false value. Now, that true or false value is whether or not they met this monthly goal. So let's all go ahead and go into cell H5 here and type in equal if and hit tab to autocomplete the function. The if function checks whether a condition is met and returns one value if true and another value if it's false. I'm going to go ahead and tab into that. The if function actually has three parameters, these things inside the parentheses. The first one being the logical test. A logical test is simply anything that can evaluate to true or false. So if you go ahead and give it this cell, F5, is greater than or equal to this cell, I2, that's a logical test that can either be true or false. And in our case, it still happens to be true. Now with the if function, once you fill in the logical test and put in the comma, comes the part where you have to fill in the value if true, so if this ends up being true. And then once you fill that in, you put the scenario if it so happened to be false. Let's go ahead and do that. I want the word yes to be in here if the goal was met. However, if it's a word, if it's a text, it's known as a string. A string, that's what they call it. A combination of characters referred to as a string, but they go in quotes. So I'm going to go ahead and put the word yes, but I'm going to put it inside of quotes, like so. And if I were to have a space in front of the Y, the space would show up. If I'd have a space in between each one of these letters, it would show up. Everything in between the quotes will show up if the answer so happens to be true. Once we filled that in, I'm going to go ahead and put a comma in. And for this one, I'm going to go ahead and type in no. But I'm going to put it in its own set of quotes. So it's its own string. I want you to give me this string if it so happens to be false. And just like that, we filled in all three parameters of the if function: the logical test, the value if it's true, and the value if it's false. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And just like that, it said yes. Now, just for good practice, go ahead and try out filling in the if function in these other cells here. Just go ahead and pause the video and fill it out and come right back. In the previous video, we went ahead and exposed ourselves to the function known as if in Excel. We learned about the 3 parameters and we filled in an example over here in column H. Let's go ahead and dive in to see what else the if function can do for us. Let's all look at the bonus status column over here in column I. And the bonus status is based off whether or not the goal was met. Now I want to give each one of my employees in the pair company sales here, I want to give them 5% of their total sales if, notice how I'm saying the word if, the goal was met. And what determines if the goal was met is the word yes. So let's go ahead and do another if function on this cell over here, I5. I'm going to go equal, type in if, hit the tab to autocomplete the if function for you, adds in the parentheses, capitalizes everything for you, makes it look consistent. Now for the logical test, it's if this cell is equal to the word yes. Now I want to show you that I'm not capitalizing the y inside the if function. The y in the yes, it's capital here, but it's not capital here. That's because it is not case sensitive. It does not matter. It's not checking to see uppercase and lowercase matches. It's simply checking to see if the characters match. Now that we have the yes in, for my value of true, I said I want to give 5% of this total sale here. So I'm simply going to go ahead and click on F5. I'm going to use the asterisk to multiply it. I'm going to do 5%. And that's if it's true, so I'm going to go ahead and do a comma. I want to point out the fact that because it's not a string, it's not a word, I left out the quotes. In the previous video, because they were words, they were strings, I left the quotes in there. But for my value if false, I simply want to put the word no, or no bonus. We'll put no bonus. And this is actually a word, it's a string. So I'm going to go ahead and add in the quotes for that part and put no bonus. And I'm just going to close the parenthesis and hit enter. Once we've done that, we should go ahead and just grab the autofill handle, that little tiny square in the corner there, and just give it 2 clicks, and it should go ahead and fill in the rest of the values for you. All right, if this all worked correctly, every cell that had the word no in it, in column H, should spit out no bonus as the answer for the if function. We have a department bonus of $850 per person. And over here we have a comment describing the rules for it. The department as a whole must have total sales of at least $200,000 and $9,000 or more per week. Now, if you've been doing the other videos and we just learned about the if function, you're probably thinking we need to use an if function to determine if the total sales and if the average sales meets those criterias. And if it does, they get a bonus. Let's go ahead and try to do that. So let's go in this cell right over here and type in equal and type in if. Now my logical test, the department as a whole must have total sales of at least $200,000 and an average of $9,000 or more per week. So we have 2 logical tests. Let's do the first one. F12 is greater than or equal to 200,000. And then you're going to hit your comma. Unfortunately for us, the if function alone will not do this task because when we hit the comma, it's asking for the value of true, not another logical test to determine the value of true. So we got to scratch that idea. We have to have something else in aid of the if function. I just want to introduce you to another function. It's called the AND. Check it out. The AND is just a function that holds a bunch of logical tests. And if all the logical tests so happen to be true, it will spit out the answer true. And the lucky part for us is the if function here, the only rule for the logical test that we need to follow is if the answer needs to be true or false. and the and satisfies that. So there is nothing stopping us from typing in the and function as the if function's parameter for the logical test. And then this will allow us to do two logical tests. Let's go ahead and do that. So if F12 is greater than or equal to 200,000, I'm going to put my comma, and just like that, I have the ability to do a second logical test. For the average sales, I'm going to go ahead and click on that, F13. I'm going to do is greater than or equal to 9,000. And now that I've filled in both of my logical tests, I'm going to go ahead and close my AND parenthesis, because that's all I needed my AND for. It was a helper function. And now that my AND function is nested within my if function, I'm going to go ahead and finish off my if. So I'm going to put my comma in. If my value if true, if all that happens to be true, I'm going to go ahead and put you get a bonus. And I'm going to put my comma in. Keep in mind I use quotes for a whole sentence. And for my value if false, I'm just going to go ahead and put in quotes, no bonus this time. And I'm going to close that quote. Go ahead and fill in this function. A few key things that I want you to be aware about is there are two functions in this. It's known as nesting a function within one another. So be sure that you close both parentheses for the functions. Notice how I have and they have two red parentheses. But over here I have if, and it still has a black parenthesis that's open. I'm going to be sure to close that. And once I have both parentheses closed, I'm going to go ahead and enter. And because I didn't meet this requirement of 9,000 for the average sales, we actually get, let's see the full word by getting the best fit for this column. No bonus this time. Go ahead and try that out. Fill in the if function with nesting in an and function, and hopefully we get the same result. In Excel, there's several ways you can round a function. There's about 11 different round functions in Microsoft Excel. I'm here just to expose you to the 4 most commonly used ones here. And for the sake of having the definitions, I put the definition down. I also put down the syntax of each of these functions, which is kind of like the manual for the function. And then a definition of what the syntax means. And in this exercise, I just want to go ahead and I have an example over here called output number based off this input number using this function here. I just want to run through this again under the try it, just to expose you to these 4 functions. So if you want to just round a number to a specified decimal point, what you need to do is use the round function. Let's go ahead and go through an example of that. Let's go into cell G3 and type in equal round. Rounds a number to a specified number of digits. All you have to give it is a number. I'm going to go ahead and select this input number, E2. I'm going to put a comma in, and now I get to choose how many digits do I want it rounded to. In this other example, this output number, I chose 1. I'll go ahead and choose 2 for this example here, and hit enter. So 5.14. Let's go ahead and see another way we can round some numbers. Round up. It rounds a number up. Well, this time, instead of determining how we want to round it, it's just always going to round up for us. And we get to choose how many digits we want to be placed in that number once it's rounded. So I'm going to go ahead and use this input number in cell G3 here. So I'm going to go equal to round, and I'm going to find the up version of it and hit tab. I'm going to select this input number, and then I want to do it with 2 digits. So I put the number 2 and I hit enter. Let's go ahead and do round down now. So round up always rounded up the number. Round down is filled out the exact same way, but this time it's always going to round down the number. Let's go ahead and do the round down function on this input number here. I'm going to go equal to round, and I'm going to find the down version of it and hit tab. I'm going to select the input number, put in a comma, and I'm going to do 2 digits this time, and close the parenthesis and hit enter. Alrighty. So the very last round function that we're going to show you is mround. This formula rounds to the nearest multiple of a specified number. You just give it a number and what multiple you want to round it to, whether it be tenths, hundreds, thousands. Let's go ahead and do the hundred thousands for this example. So we're going to go ahead and do equal to mround, hit tab, select the number that you want to round, and say that you want to round it to the 100,000. And go ahead and hit enter. And just like that, we expose ourselves to 4 different ways we can round a function in Excel. Alrighty. Currently on error checking 0 with the sample file provided for this class. And let's all go ahead and hover over to our Formulas tab and give it a click. I would like to expose you to the Formula Auditing Command Group, where it's a bunch of set of tools that you can use to figure out what's going on in a formula or to see the output versus the formula itself. I just want to run through the various tools that we have, starting out with the very first one called Show Formulas. Now, Show Formulas does have a keyboard shortcut. I have it listed right over here in this comment. It lets you see all the formulas on a spreadsheet instead of the outputs. So if you have a lot of formulas, just go ahead and turn on Show Formulas to see the formulas on the spreadsheet. Now that we exposed ourselves to that, let's go ahead and turn that off. And let's all go ahead and click on the result cell here. So let's all go to cell D7. And instead this time, instead of hitting Show Formulas, let's hit F2 on our keyboard. What this does, F2, is it shows you the formula on the selected cell, the cell that has the green border. Show Formulas will show you every single cell, so use them appropriately. All right. Now that we have that down, one thing that's very useful to know, a tool that you have, is sometimes you'll be messing around with the cell, like this result cell, and this question pops up. What did I use to determine this result? What cells made this result? What you're asking yourself is, what preceded this result cell? I mean, yes, you can look into the formula bar and be like, oh, there's C3, there's E3. But what if they were in different pages? What if they're across a different sheet? Then you have to go find that sheet and that cell. Pretty tedious. Well, instead of doing that, if you just go ahead and select the cell and hover over to your Formulas tab, you can go ahead and click Trace Precedence. You can show what precedes that current cell. Let's go ahead and give that a click. Okay, just like that, I have these 2 blue arrows that Excel generated for me, letting me know that the result cell is generated by number 1 and number 2. Let's go ahead and turn off the arrows by going to Remove Arrows in the Formula Auditing Command Group. Otherwise, if you send this file to someone, those arrows will be there and they'll be in the way. I'm going to go ahead and hit Remove Arrows. Now, the inverse of trace precedence is trace dependence. Now, what I mean by that is if you have the question in your head, if I delete a certain cell, does anything depend on it? So if I delete number 2, does anything depend on it? Instead of you trying to sit there and think it through, just have the software tell you. You just go ahead and select the cell. Let's go ahead and select E3, number 2, and see what's dependent on it by tracing its dependence up in the Formula Auditing Command Group. Okay, I want to point out to you that there's a blue line now and there's a dotted line. This dotted line refers to the fact that there's another cell on a different sheet that's using this. If you were to double click on this line right over here, it will go ahead and open up the Go To box, and you can go ahead and select that cell and hit OK, and it will take you to it. Go ahead and expose yourself to the trace precedence and trace dependence, and be sure once you have exposed yourself to them to remove the arrows so they're not in the way. Very commonly used function in Excel is known as the vertical lookup, the VLOOKUP function. So let me explain a task to you. We have an employee information master list over here. This can be on a separate spreadsheet or on the same spreadsheet. In my example, it's on the same spreadsheet. And based off the employee ID, the first column in the data set, we want to find the employee's last name, their first name, their department, and their pay rate. And we do that by using a function known as VLOOKUP. Now, VLOOKUP has some rules we need to know about before we could actually use it. So let's all go over here in column N here and type in VLOOKUP rules. VLOOKUP rules. Now, each parameter I want to say has a rule. The VLOOKUP has 4 parameters that we need to use. The first one being the lookup value. Lookup underscore value. Now, with the lookup value, it must be the leftmost column. So it must be the leftmost column of the data set here. And what I mean by that is it has to be the left column of the data set, not the spreadsheet. So if this was the data set started on column B and employee ID started on column B, that'd still be the first column in this data set. So right after you give it the lookup value, and in our case it would be 1054, it's going to ask for something known as a table array. And I bet you're wondering, what's a table array? A table array is simply 2 or more columns of data. 2 or more columns of data. So when I have this chunk of data highlighted, I have 1 column, 2 column, 3 column, 4 column, all the way up to 9. So I have a table array with 9 different columns here for me to use. Your lookup value has to always be in the very first column, the number 1 column. Right after you gave it the table array, these 9 columns of data, it's going to instantly ask for something known as the column index number. Now, the column index number is actually those numbers I drew out there a second ago. So earlier I had these numbers here, so we said lookup value must be 1. We had numbers on top of each column all the way up to 9. These are the column index numbers. So if you're looking for the last name, you have to give it the column index number for the last name, which would be 2. So in our case, it'd be 2. So the rule for the column index number, it's the placement of the column in the table array. And in our case, for the last name, it's 2. So the very last parameter that it's going to ask for is an optional parameter. It's known as the range lookup. I'm putting it in brackets to signify that it's optional. Now the range lookup, if you were to put the word true in there, what you're asking for is you're asking for an approximate match if it does not find what you're looking for, an approximate match. Meaning if I don't find 1054, will you accept 1056 last name? Most of the time we don't want to do that. But if you go ahead and put the word false, or if you put 0, what you're asking for is an exact match based off that lookup value. So we have a bunch of rules we need to know about with VLOOKUP. In the next video, we're going to go ahead and dive right into it. Alrighty, now that we have the rules of the VLOOKUP in place, let's go ahead and do our first example of VLOOKUP. So we're going to find the last name based off an employee ID. So we're going to go equal, type in VLOOKUP, and hit tab to find that, and fill in the rest of the value for us. So now it's asking for my lookup value, and we determined that has to be the leftmost column, and we're going to use the employee ID 1054. I'm going to go ahead and give that a click. I'm going to hit a comma to let it know that I want to move over to the table array parameter. Now for my table array, we determined that it has to be 2 or more columns of data. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight the data set. But you got to realize this may be 60 columns of data. So me manually doing it might take a while. Instead, I'm going to use the Control and the Shift key and the right arrow to highlight it for me. And then I'm going to use the Control and the Shift key I'm going to use the down arrow to highlight the rest for me. And then I'm going to go ahead and scroll on up. And that's it for my table array. We're now in the column index number after we put the comma in after the table array. And for the column index number, it's based off the table array's placement of that column. We determined that we want to find the last name, which was the second column in the table array. So we're going to go ahead and use the number 2. Now this last parameter is the optional one, meaning you don't have to put it. It's always just going to default to false, to true, to an exact match. But if you want to find an approximate match, you can go ahead and put the word true. I'm just going to go ahead and put the word false in there by going to it and hitting tab, closing my parenthesis, and hitting enter. And just like that, Smith is being found from the database here. Last name Smith based off employee ID 1054. Go ahead and, with these rules in play, try to find the first name, the department, and the pay rate of this employee based off their employee ID. A very useful function that goes in aid of any function you can think of is an error handling function. Now, what if this VLOOKUP is trying to look for a value that doesn't exist in this database based off this employee ID? So I'll go ahead and change this employee ID to the number 10,000. All right. It says #NA. That's a Microsoft error code. Stands for not available, meaning it's not in this database. Now, if you want to do a more human readable code, you have to have a function for it. It's a very simple function to use. It's a nested function. So if you do need to refer back to the very first video about nested functions, go ahead and do so. But we're going to go ahead and nest a function in front of the VLOOKUP here so that we can have our own error codes instead of this NA pop-up if it's not found. In order to do that, we have to use a function known as ifError. So let's all go ahead and put our cursor in our formula bar and go right in front of the VLOOKUP. Because when you do an edit, it's much easier to do the edit inside the formula bar versus the cell itself. Right after the equal sign, go ahead and type in if, and go down to ifError. It returns a value if error, if expression is an error, and the value of the expression itself otherwise. So if error, the parameters are value and value if error. The value part is simply any function inside of the function library in Excel. And the value if error simply means if this so happens to give me an error code instead of the number or the answer I'm looking for, go ahead and replace it with this string instead of that error code. So I'm just going to put not in table, letting the user know that that value, employee ID 10,000, is not in the table instead of NA. And once I do that, I'm going to close the quote and close my parenthesis and hit enter. Go ahead and try updating the first name column, department column, and the pay rate column to give an error code that's much more human readable than NA. Sometimes you'll be analyzing data and you want to retrieve certain things from that database, we'll call it. Now, when you're asking to retrieve information from a database, what it's called is you're asking for a query, a request for information. Now, in Excel, there's a bunch of database functions that does that task for us. It gives us the information based off a certain condition or criteria. So, several different database functions that we're going to run through. Now, the good thing about them is once you know one of them, it's kind of like you know all of them because they're very simple to fill in. And it's just under the hood, the algorithm does something different depending on which one you use. So let me explain this task over here for us. This one right over here. I want to look up the total expenses if it's in the category software. I would like to sum up the total expenses if it's in the category software. In order to do that, manually, you would have to sit there and count up all the ones that say software and keep adding up the total expenses for each one. Lucky for us, there's a function known as SUMIF in Excel that does it for us. Sum up the conditions if it meets a certain criteria. So I'm going to go ahead and do equal sign and do sum. I'm going to go down to where it says if, adds the cell specified by a given condition or criteria, and hit tab. Now for a sum if, there's three parameters, a range, a criteria, and a sum range. The range is simply the list of all possible options. Now, what are the options? It's the categories. So the range is where all the category lives. So I'm just going to highlight the entire category column by going to C5 and holding Control and Shift and hitting the down arrow. And that's the range where all the possible options live. Then I'm going to give it a criteria. I want you to look for the word software. Now I can click inside of this data set, but what if someone sorted it? Or I can type in the word software manually, but what if I make an error? So instead, I'm just going to click on this cell that says software here, or I can just type in the cell's value, I14, to refer to that cell as the criteria. And in case I need to change it to rent or overhead, I can do it very easily. Next, I'm going to hit a comma. Now the final thing it's asking for is asking for the range that you want to sum up. And I determined that I want to sum up the total expenses if it's in the category software. So for the sum range, I'm just going to go ahead and highlight the total expense column by clicking on the first value, holding Control and Shift and hitting the down arrow. Now once I have these three parameters in, I can go ahead and close my parenthesis. Now this formula, or this function we'll call it, will go ahead and calculate the sum if the category so happens to be software. Let's go ahead and add up each of the total expenses where it sees software. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter here. Now we just did the sum if function over here. There's another function called the average if. It gets the average of the numbers. It just divides it by how many numbers you had selected in the first option for us. It just divides it by the total numbers we had selected. So I want to show you that the average expense formula, the parameters for it. So average if, it's the same exact thing as the sum if, range, criteria, except it's asking for the average of the range. Go ahead and try filling in the average if function based off the knowledge of the sum if, and just realize that under the hood, it just does a different algorithm for us. Another more advanced database function happens to do when you have multiple criteria you're looking for. So I'll go ahead and focus on the top function here. So we want to look up the expenses if it so happens to be the division East and if it so happens to be in the category software. So I only want to load up the expenses. Go ahead and show you that. If it's in the division East and it's software, so this will meet the criteria. But then if you scroll on over here where it says North, this would not meet the criteria. So it would ignore that one. So it's slightly different. In order to do that, there's multiple ifs, they call it. The ifs part is there's two of them. If it's in division, if it's in category. So with that function, they just went ahead and they called it sum ifs. They just put an S at the end. Equals sum, go to if, and there's sum ifs. Now this is when you have more than one criteria. This time I have division and category to check for. Because we have two criteria, it's going to ask for the thing you want to sum up first this time, that last parameter in the previous ones. So we're going to go ahead and sum up the total expenses by selecting the total expenses and using Control Shift and hitting the down arrow to highlight the entire column for us. Now, once we give it the sum, the range that we want to sum up, that's when we give it the range of criterias. And it's really important to be consistent about this. So I'm going to go ahead and give it the range for division. These are all the divisions. And once I give it the range for division, it's going to ask me for the criteria. What am I looking for in division? I'm looking for East. So let's go ahead and click on East here. Next, it's going to ask the same thing again. We're going to do the same process, but this time we're going to do it for category. It already knows what we want to sum up, total expenses. It has that. It's highlighted. The last piece is the category piece. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight the category, this first start of it, C5, and hold Control and Shift and hit the down arrow. Once I have that highlighted, I'm going to go ahead and put my comma in. And now for my criteria, I want to point out that there's this gray wall in front of the cell that we need to click on. It's just much easier to go ahead and type in J8 as opposed to trying to click through that gray wall. So I'm going to go ahead and type in J8, and then I'm going to close my parenthesis. So we have the sum of the total expenses, and then we have the range, which is the division, and then we have that criteria, which is east. And then over here, we have our next range with our next criteria. Now it's really important to not mix up your criterias with the different ranges, otherwise it won't find a match. Once you have that in, go ahead and hit enter. And the total expenses for the division east in the category software is $5,875. And that's something we can cross-reference here, since there's only one of them, like so. Go ahead and give that a try if you have not yet, and see if we have the same results. Excel is a great tool to analyze numbers, but it's also a great tool to use as a spreadsheet for text, because it has a bunch of functions to manipulate numbers and text. Let's go ahead and expose ourselves to a set of functions that we can use when dealing with text in Excel. So over here on the text functions sheet, I have a last name cell and a first name cell, and I want to put it together to make a full name. Believe it or not, there's a function for that. It's pretty simple to use. And we actually want to concatenate these two cells together, it's called. And that's what they called the function, concatenate. So let's go ahead and try out an example of it. So go put in an equal sign and type in con, and then go over where it says concatenate. Join several text strings into one text string, and hit tab. The parameter is simply just text. So let's all select the first text, Howard, and then after that put a comma, and we need to add in a space between the first name and the last name. And in order to do that, we just simply need to put in quotes a blank space as the second text, and then hit a comma. And once you have that in, you can go ahead and give that last name cell. And then you can close your parenthesis and hit enter. And you can go ahead and use that lovely, very useful autofill handle and just drag it down to do the rest for you. Pretty cool. All right. Now that we know how to put cells together, I want to show you how to do the exact opposite of that. How do you break a cell apart? Well, there's three functions for that: left, mid, and right. Let's go ahead and expose ourselves to it. So I'll go ahead and cell H5, type in equal left, returns the specified number of characters from the start of a text string, obviously from the left. So I'm going to go ahead and give it the word nevertheless. And now it's asking for the number of characters that I want to read off from the left-hand side. It never has 5 characters, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit 5. I'm going to hit enter. And just like that, I have the word never. Let's go ahead and try out the right function. So I'm going to go ahead in this cell over here, J5, type in equal, and type in right. Returns the specified number of characters from the end of a text string. I'm going to go ahead and select the text, I8. And this time, the word less has 4 characters. So I'm going to go ahead and give it 4, close my parenthesis, and hit enter. Now the reason why I saved mid for last is because it has an extra parameter. It's not the mathematical middle, not the mean, but you get to pick the starting point. So you give it text, and now you want to pick the middle. So never ended on 5. So the part starts at 6. The T starts at 6. And then you tell it how many characters you want it to read. And I want it to read 3 characters because the word the has 3 characters for us. I go ahead and hit enter. Alrighty. Pretty useful functions. Now, another tool that you get to use is, let's say you have a cell or several cells and they have a bunch of numbers in them, but these numbers need to be broken up. Maybe the first 3 in this cell might be the quantity number and the first 4 might be the quantity number in this cell. The last or the second parameter might be the units sold and the units we need to order. So these values, although it makes sense to store them in one cell, we might want to analyze them in different cells. So we have a tool to help us do that. I want to point out that these numbers are inconsistent. One starts with 2, then there's a dash. One starts with 4, then there's a dash. This one starts with 2, and we have a dash. The one thing that this set has in common is that dash in between each of these numbers. We can actually use this common characteristic to split up those numbers into different cells. All you have to do is go over to your data tab, because we're dealing with data here, and I want to expose you to the data tools. One of them being splitting the text into columns. I'm going to go ahead and select that option here, and you should too. And I'm going to move this to the side. It's just a 3-step wizard. And now it's asking if we're doing a delimited split or a fixed width split. If these were all split up by 3 numbers and we want to do the first 3 numbers, we'd use a fixed width. But we want to break it based off the dash. The dash is referred to as the delimiter. I'm going to go ahead and select the delimited option and hit next. And we have a control of what we want to choose as our delimiter. Some people use slashes, some people use dashes, some use commas. Let's all go ahead and go to Other and specify that we chose a dash. And it's going to show you in the data preview how the numbers will be split once we finish. Before we finish, I want to point out that when you hit next on the 3rd step, it's simply to choose the number format of each of the columns of data that you're about to create. This is an optional step. You can skip it and do it later. So you can go ahead and hit finish, even if you're on step 2. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And just like that, we're able to split up these cells into different columns. And how did we do that? We went over to our data tab and used text to columns. Alrighty, moving over to the right here. Now, some other useful functions when dealing with text that I want you to be aware about is just 3 of them. We have a function called proper, a function called upper, and a function called lower. Let's go ahead and try them out. So let's type in equal proper. Now the proper function, if you give it a cell with text, it can be a word or a sentence. I'm going to go ahead and give it this cell right over here, Faz Kareem. It will go ahead and capitalize every first letter of that cell, making it proper. Now the upper function, equal upper, hit tab, will go ahead and capitalize every single letter in that cell that you give it. And the lower function, equal lower, will go ahead and lowercase everything in a given cell. Use these functions to keep consistency when you're dealing with people inputting values on a spreadsheet. Currently in the sample file provided for this class, let's go ahead and look around these worksheets. I'm going to go ahead and click on the Connecticut sheet. So I have a Connecticut division here, and we're selling software, training, and maintenance, and miscellaneous items. We have a 4-quarter breakdown with some totals. If I go over here to Maine, same thing, software, training, maintenance, and miscellaneous. New Hampshire, software, training, maintenance, miscellaneous, with their 4-quarter breakdown and totals on the bottom. All right. Now, what if we want to go ahead and find a summary sheet, a summary division? So we want to go ahead and put these 3 sheets together in a summary sheet, and we want to consolidate them all. There's several ways you can do this manually, but there's a tool in Excel that lets you do it. Let's all go ahead and go to the consolidated summary sheet, and we want to go ahead and consolidate these 3 sheets based off the positioning of the values inside of the cells. And in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and highlight the same positions on the summary sheet that we want to show up from Connecticut, Maine, and New Hampshire. So once we have that chunk of cells highlighted, and I just went ahead and copied the headers there to make it easy, all we need to do is go over to our Data tab, and in our Data Tools, we have a tool known as Consolidate. It just summarizes the data from separate ranges. I'm going to go ahead and give that a click, and you should too. And now you just go ahead and fill in the window. You pick what function you want to do. I want to sum up those values. I have other options, like maybe count them, find the average, the biggest one, but I just want to choose the sum. Next, I'm going to go ahead and choose what sheets do I want to summarize. So I'm going to go and reference, put my cursor in here for reference. And once I have it referenced, I'm going to go to the very first sheet and give it a click, Connecticut. I'm going to highlight the same chunk of cells that I had highlighted inside of my summary sheet. And I'm making sure not to have any blank values inside of this highlight. And once I have that reference in, I'm going to go ahead and add it to the reference window by hitting add. Now you're going to do that for main as well. So you're just going to go ahead and click on main. And you're going to notice how it automatically did the highlight for you. It predicted that you want to use the same chunk of cells, and it filled it in. So all you have to do is hit add. Now let's do that one last time for New Hampshire. And all we need to do is once we see it in there, in the reference, has the same range of cells, we're going to go ahead and add it to the all reference window. Now comes time where we want to fill in whether or not we want to use the labels from the top row and the left column. And typically, because they're the same exact sheets, we want to go ahead and mimic that. We want to use the labels from the top row and the left column here. So I'm going to go ahead and leave those check marked on by adding that in. And now we have the option to create links to the source data. What that basically means is if you want to change one of the values from these sheets, do you want it to automatically update the summary sheet? In most cases, you do. In some cases, you don't. Just know you have that power. I'm going to go ahead and choose to create links to the source data. These three sheets are the source data. Once I have this all filled in, I'm going to simply hit OK. And if everything worked out correctly, you're going to have two views of this worksheet pop up. Now, the second view is simply the values that it used to determine the answer. And you can go ahead and use cross-reference Connecticut B4, Maine B4, New Hampshire B4. Together it made 1,500. And then the first view is just simply the summary sheet that you wanted, with those rows all hidden from you, like so. Pretty useful feature. Go ahead and try that out if you have not yet, and expose yourself to consolidation by position. Alrighty. In the previous video, we learned how to consolidate by position. Let's go ahead and analyze these three sheets over here, Henry, Allen, and Caroline. I'm going to go ahead and click on Henry. I want to point out that Henry's selling an encyclopedia, a dictionary, and a thesaurus here. I'm going to go ahead and click on Allen P and see what he's selling. Okay, so he sold a thesaurus, road atlas, and an encyclopedia. See Caroline. Okay, a road atlas and a dictionary. Okay, so they all have different products that they're selling. They're all in different positions. It can still be consolidated. I'm going to go ahead and click on the consolidate sheet. What we now need to do is consolidate by category. The only difference versus doing it by position and category is when we do it by position, we have to highlight the position on the summary sheet that we want it to show up. When we do it by category, we go ahead and let it figure itself out based off the cell's values inside of them and matching them. So we're going to go ahead and leave that blank, and we're not going to have anything highlighted. All we need to do is just on the summary sheet that we have that we want to build, we're just going to go up and click consolidate. The consolidate can be found in the data tab inside of the data tools. I'm going to go ahead and give that a click. And I want to use the sum function for this consolidation as well, and you should too. And let's all go ahead and click on Henry A, the very first one, and highlight the same chunk of cells here. And let's add it to the reference list. Add. I'm going to do the same thing for Allen. Great. So for us, it went ahead and highlighted the same chunk, predicted right. Hit OK and hit add. I'm going to do the same thing for Caroline, except that this time it predicted wrong. It thinks that because Henry A and Allen P had three products they're selling, it has that blank row selected. If you leave it there, it will do the calculations incorrectly. So we have to go ahead and update that and fix it. Once we fix that blank cell, we're going to go ahead and add that to the reference list. And same as before, we're going to use the labels in the top row and the left column. It's a good idea to create links to the original sheets in case they change. You don't have to redo this step. I'm going to go ahead and create links to the source data and hit OK. And just like that, we have our two views. I'm going to go ahead and go to the second view to show you Alan P. B5 and Henry A. B7 went ahead and built $44. And Henry A. B7 is thesaurus. Alan P. B5 thesaurus. So went ahead and added them correctly for us. Pretty useful feature. Go ahead and give that a try if you have not. I'm currently on the goal seek sheet on the sample file provided for this class. And we have a question. We did a little poll here. The question is Excel awesome? And we needed 2/3 of the vote to be a winner. We needed 2/3 of the votes. And 2/3 of the votes equaled out to be 66.67%. Whoever has 2/3 of the votes wins. My question is, how many more votes did we need to win? As you can see, Excel got 63.90. You can go ahead and sit there and change this number 4478 to 4450 maybe. Okay, 63.70. I'm going to undo that, 4478. So we're going to keep changing it over and over again until we get to that number. Or you can just have the software do it for you if you have familiarity with the tool that we need to grab. Now what we're asking is a what if question. What if we would have won? How many votes did we need? I want to point out to you that in your data tab, you have a what if analysis icon. One of the options in the what if analysis, let's all go to it, is goal seek. We're seeking a goal, and that goal is 66.67%. And we want to see how we could have reached that goal by changing a certain cell, like the votes. I'm going to go ahead and click Goal Seek. And Goal Seek is a very simple window to fill out. It's a set cell, a to value, by changing a cell. So I want to go ahead and set this cell, the 63.90 cell, I want to set it to 66.67%. And I actually want it to change this value, 4478, to see what number I need. How many number of votes that I need to win. Once it does that, I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. So notice how it says it changed the number, 5,054 with the decimal place. So GoalSeek went ahead and found our answer for us. It said we needed 5,054 votes with the decimal place to obtain this percentage, 66.64. But I told it needed 66.67. That's because GoalSeek actually rounds to the nearest number. But with this information, you're very close to it. So 5054, I'm sure if we go ahead and I'm going to hit OK here, maybe change this to, I don't know what, 57 maybe, we'll check that one, or maybe 60, 50, 60. Well, that was exactly it. So just one extra guess further got me to where I needed to go instead of playing that guessing game. Go ahead and try the GoalSeek and see if you can find the correct value that we needed to win this poll. I'm currently on the PMT data table sheet in the sample file provided for this class. And on this sheet, we have a credit card payment plan. We have a current balance of $8,000. We have an interest rate of 14.2% and a monthly projected payments of 48 months. And there's a function known as PMT that calculates your monthly payment. Except that the requirements for it, notice how we have the PMT function up here, is that it must have a fixed interest rate and it must have a fixed monthly plan. Typically, when you want to analyze data like this, you want to see a different interest rate or maybe a different month plan and see the effective payment plan. Unless you want to build hundreds of formulas and functions to calculate the tweaks of the interest rates and the tweaks of the payment plans, you're going to need to build what we call a data table to find the values for you. Now, I went ahead and built the data table here. Notice how I have a column of data, and these are my interest rates. So the plan here is I want to fill in the function that I have up here, but I want to use this interest rate instead of the 14.2. I want to keep swapping them. So it's going to swap it with that, and then it's going to put the answer here. And once it's done with that, it's going to go ahead and go back here, and then it's going to do the next one. It's going to keep doing that until it completes the data table. This is another one of those what if questions. What if I had a 12% interest rate? 12.5, 13. We're going to need to build that data table, and we've already done that. So once we have it built, just go ahead and highlight it. Highlight the data table. And let's all hover over to our data tab here. In our data tab, we have the what if analysis. And let's all click on data table. See the results of multiple inputs at the same time. All right, so in the data table, just two values to fill. You don't have to fill both at the same time. So let's just look at this. Our row input cell. Right now in my data table, I actually don't have any rows. I just have a interest column. So you're allowed to skip out on one of the values here because you don't have it, but I have a column input cell. And it already has the values that I want to replace it with highlighted. It needs to know in the column input cell what you want to swap it with. And the original value that it had in the interest rate was 14.2. So I'm going to go ahead and select that original value and just hit OK. Just like that, it went ahead and filled in the function with these set of values instead of the 14.2. Go ahead and try that over on the practice side. And please be aware that I did change the column to months when I did that. Let's go ahead and pause the video and give that a try. Alrighty, I'm currently on the PMT data table sheet. And in the previous video, in part 1, we went over the algorithm of the data table and how it works and what it does for us. We went through an example and we had a practice exercise. Now I want to go ahead and try a PMT data table, but this time I want to give it both a row input and a column input. So I went ahead and built my interest rates over here. And I went ahead and put my months over here. And I have the original formula in the corner over here. I'm just going to highlight this data set, this data table, I should call it. Once I have it highlighted, I'm going to go to the what if analysis that's in my data tab and click on data table. Now for my row input cell, we discussed that we have to use original values because it already has these values selected. It already knows about them. So for my row input, my rows are months. I'm going to make sure to select the month over here. And for my column input, I need to pick the original value, and my column is interest rates. So I'm going to select interest rate and just hit OK. Go ahead and try that for yourself on this side of the sheet. And do keep in mind that I have swapped the values for you. Did you know that you can actually put two values in one cell on a spreadsheet? Pretty powerful if you want to just quickly change certain values on a spreadsheet based off certain values. So let's go ahead and analyze the spreadsheet for a second. I have a list of information here. It's the predicted sales growth for North, East, West, and South. And up here I have a table that I built. And it's actually, each one of these cells are using one of these values, whether it be for North, East, West, and South. It's for the predicted sales growth. Notice I have C11 for North, I have C12 for East, C13 for West, and C14 for South. But what if I want to see a predicted sales growth for my worst case? Because this is just average, this is just original. What if I want to see it for my best case? There's a way we can switch the values in these cells so that we can see all these values change based off the reflective change in these cells. This is another one of those what if questions. What if we have a worst case? What if we have a best case? So we're still going to be in our data tab. We're going to hover over to the what if analysis, to where I want to expose you to the scenario manager. We have different scenarios that we can build based off certain values in our spreadsheets. I'm going to go ahead and give that a click. Now, I'm going to go ahead and add a scenario to this watch here. The scenario name, the first one that I built, is going to be called original. And we get to choose what cells we want to change. So I'm going to put my cursor in here. And I'm just going to select that I want these values to change in my scenario. And you can put a comment. I'm just going to go ahead and put original case values. Spaces can be included, so I'm just going to go ahead and put those spaces in there for us. And I'm going to hit OK. Now, because this is our original case, I'm not going to modify any of these values. I'll do to my next scenario. I'm just simply going to hit OK. Now that we have the original in place and we have a way to get back to these values once we change them, let's go ahead and add in our worst case scenario for these predicted cell growth. So we all just went to our data tab in case we accidentally closed out the scenario manager and went to what if analysis. And then it took us to the scenario manager and we choose add. And this was going to be called worst case. And we're going to change these cells, and it already found them for us, and we're going to hit OK. And my best case is 3.3. I'm going to go ahead and make that 3.0 for my worst case. My east is 2.30. I'm going to make that 2.0. For my west, I'm just going to go ahead and change that from 4.30 to 4.0. And for my south, I'm just going to go ahead and change that to 1%. All right. Once you've go ahead and added in your worst case for the predicted cells growth, you can hit OK. Now for practice, go ahead and try adding in a best case for the predicted cells growth by hitting add and adding in that case and come right back. Alrighty. Hopefully you went ahead and added in that worst and best and we have the original case in there. When it comes time for you to switch the values in the cell, let's say you're in a presentation or a meeting or you're sharing your screen with someone, instead of opening up another workbook now, all you need to do is go back to your data tab and go to your what if analysis and open up your scenario manager. Once the scenario manager is open and while you're discussing this data, when it comes time to discuss the worst case, you simply highlight it and choose to hit show. And then notice how these values changed to the values we set them to. And it also updated the table above, like so. And once you're ready to go back to the original case, you can go ahead and highlight the original and choose to hit show. And it goes back to the original. Pretty cool, nifty feature if you have to compare values and present to people and share your screen. Instead of going into various workbooks and analyzing these workbooks with different sheets in them, you can go ahead and have it all in the same spot and just keep toggling between the views. Currently on the intro macro sheet on the sample file provided for this class, we're about to go ahead and record a macro. And for those of you that don't know what a macro is, it's basically you recording yourself doing something in Microsoft Excel so that you can save that task and then you can assign it to a keyboard shortcut and you can run it off one keystroke. Now, in order to build your first macro and record yourself doing something, you have to add in a developer tab to the ribbon interface. Pretty simple to do, and once you add it in, it'll go ahead and remain in the ribbon interface until you choose to remove it. Let's all go ahead and add the developer tab by going to the File tab inside of Excel 2019. Once we're at the File tab, we're going to go ahead and scroll all the way down to where it says Options. This is where you can go to modify the application level options. We are currently on the Excel Options window on the General setting. We got here by clicking on File and going down to Options. And we were talking about adding the Developer tab to the ribbon. And there so happens to be a tab over here that says Customize Ribbon. Let's go ahead and give that a click. And if you go over here to the right-hand window, this is your ribbon in a different view. If you think about it, we have Home, Insert, Draw, Page Layout, Formulas, Data, Review, View, and then Developer. And Developer is not checkmarked on. Let's go ahead and checkmark that on. And be sure to hit OK once you do that, and not the X up here. I called this the reject, and I called this the accept. So let's go ahead and accept that Developer tab. Alrighty, and that's how you add the Developer tab to your ribbon. And let's all go ahead and go to the Developer tab and give it a click. I would just like to expose you to the Code command group, to where we have the Visual Basic Editor, our macro library, the ability to record macros, and the ability to toggle between relative and absolute referencing when recording the macro. A great introduction to macros is to simply build a macro that builds a header on every single one of your spreadsheets. a header meaning your first name, your company name, and the date. Now, there's two ways you can record a macro. Notice how we have use relative referencing over here. Give it a click. Notice how it stayed grayed in. So we just turned on relative referencing. And if we were to record our macro, it would record in relative referencing mode. I would like to discuss the difference between a relative reference macro versus an absolute reference macro. If I were to use relative referencing and I build my header, and let's say I put my name, Faz Kareem, and then I put my company, Learn It, and then I put the date, but I use a function equal today to find me the current date every day, like so. Because I used relative referencing and I left it on as I was recording, I'm not recording right now, I'm just talking about it. What I did is I allowed myself to build my header anywhere on the spreadsheet. So if I put my cell address here and I run my macro, the header is going to show up here. Then if I go ahead and put my cell address here and I run my macro, the header is going to show up here. So relative lets you control where you want to put the macro and where you want to run it. Now if you leave that off, let's go ahead and turn that off. And let's say we just did this. We typed in our first name, our company name, and the date. Because we did not use relative referencing, what that basically did for us is no matter what we do, no matter where we are, our macro is going to always run in cell A1, A2, and A3. It's absolutely going to run in those cells that you recorded it in. So now that we know the difference between absolute and relative, let's go ahead and try to record our very first macro using relative references. So in order to record a macro, I'm going to go ahead and clear out these values here. I'm going to start on cell A1 and I'm going to turn on relative references. You should go ahead and do that too. And in order to record a macro, we have a record icon here. And if you look down on the bottom of your screen, you actually have one right there too. The stop for the recording shows up in the same spot for the recording icon once you start recording your macro. So I just want you to be aware of where we need to go to stop the macro once it's recorded. Because everything has to be done in a neat fashion because you're recording yourself doing it. So you don't want to make mistakes while you do this. I'm going to go ahead and hit record macro. So everyone, shh. I'm just kidding. It's not recording your voice. Now for my macro name, it has to be one word. I'm just going to call it my first macro. We then get to assign a keyboard shortcut to run this macro. I'm just going to go ahead and choose a shortcut that I don't already have assigned to something. Now, a lot of those are already taken, like Control S, Control M. So when you're running out of shortcuts to use, I want to show you that if you hold the Shift key, and then let's say we choose the letter S, the shortcut now becomes Control Shift S. Not a lot of shortcuts use Shift. I'm going to go ahead and leave this shortcut as Control Shift S. If you were to accidentally use Control S, you would have wiped out the shortcut to save your workbook. The macro takes precedence. Next, you have the ability to record this macro in this workbook, or you can build a personal macro workbook that stores all your macros inside of a workbook for you so you can use them across other workbooks. For this example, I'm just going to go ahead and use this workbook. For the description, I'm going to call it a header macro. I'm simply going to hit OK. Now that we're recording, notice how the stop recording icon showed up in the same spot the record icon was. I'm going to go ahead and type in Faz Kareem. Keep in mind everything's being recorded right now. Then I'm going to type in my company name. Then afterwards, I'm going to go ahead and put in the date. But I want to use this macro tomorrow maybe. So I'm going to use a function known as equal today, open parenthesis and close parenthesis, which will generate the current date every time I run the spreadsheet. Alrighty. Now that I have that in there, I'm going to go back to cell A1 by giving it a click. Or I could have hit Control Home to go back to A1. And then I'm going to stop recording. Alright. Now that we built our macro, we use relative referencing. Let's all go ahead and click on column D. I'm in cell D1. Let's try to use that shortcut to run our macro. I'm going to hit Control Shift S. Great. So I went ahead and ran my macro there for me, recorded all those actions I did. Now, what if we forgot to assign it a shortcut? Because that was optional. What you'd have to do to run the macro is let's say we go on column I1 here. I'm going to go to my macro library. And in order to run that macro, you click on the macro library and hit run. It'll run that macro for you. Now, if this hasn't worked for you and it's showing it as a debug error, go ahead and just redo the process, build the macro again, give it a shortcut, and try it again, and be sure that we have relative referencing on. Alrighty, now that we've recorded our very first macro, I want to expose you to what we're really doing. We're actually writing code. We're writing Visual Basic application code. Notice how we have a Visual Basic icon in the Developer tab here. That's because you can open up a Visual Basic IDE, an Integrated Development Environment. What this does is it allows you to see the code that you wrote by recording yourself. Now, let's all go to our Visual Basic library here and give it a click. And I'm going to go ahead and expand the modules here a little bit for my VBA project. I'm going to scroll all the way down to where it says modules. This module right here, that's actually the code that we just recorded. I'm going to go ahead and right click it. I'm going to view the code that we recorded. So check it out. I'm going to move this to the side here, put my workbook there. Alrighty. So let me make this a little smaller for us. We have a macro. It's our subroutine. It's my first macro. These little apostrophes and the things in green, they're comments. These comments describe the code, and it also lists the shortcut and the description you gave for it. Now, the code is actually this part here. So over here, we have a object. We have an active cell selected. And then we use a method over here, formula R1C1, which allows us to fill in the active cell. We put Faz Kareem. If we were to make a mistake, we could have edited the word here, because we know that much. And then after that, we went into the active cell, and then we used a method called offset to go down from the range. And then we selected that range. And we went back into that active cell, and we used the formula R1C1. Which allows us to type into the cell, which allows us to put the string learn it. And then we went ahead and went down to the next cell and put in the date. And then the last thing we did is we went back to A1 at the very end, and that's what the code is saying for us. Now, VBA is a pretty robust language, but you can spend time modifying pieces of it, like so, the type, the Faz Kareem, the learn it part, the function. If you miss the parentheses, you can go ahead and fix it. You don't fix it while you're recording because you're recording yourself. Fix the mistake. Alrighty. I'm going to go ahead and just close out this editor here. Just close it out and go back to full screen. Again, we access the Visual Basic editor by just clicking on Visual Basic. Now, some of us may have forgot to add in a shortcut to this macro. That's not the only way you can actually run this macro. Besides the code group in the Developer tab that's useful for us, I want to expose you to the Controls command group, to where we have an insert icon, insert controls into the document. Let's go ahead and click it. There are two types of controls you can insert into this workbook here. We have form controls and ActiveX controls. Now, ActiveX controls, what it does is if you place this icon, it's a little button that shows up on the screen, it's going to instantly open the Visual Basic editor on a blank sheet, and you can write out VBA to do certain tasks for you. However, not many people know VBA, and not a lot of people want to sit there and write it. The form control version of it allows you to go ahead and click on form control and paste that button. And then instead of opening up the Visual Basic editor, it opens up your macro library where you can assign a macro, that macro we just recorded. Let's go ahead and assign this macro to that icon. And just like that, it shows up as a button. The name can be updated. You can just put your cursor in there, clear it out, and I'm just going to call it header. All right. Now, if you click away from it and then click back on it, it's going to let you run your macro every time you click it. But what if you want to move it? Or what if you want to change the size of it? You would right-click it first. then these little dots appear, and then you can adjust the size. You can go ahead and move it from the side of it. And that's how you go ahead and add your own button to run your macro. All right. Macros seem pretty powerful, if you ask me. It's kind of like you're developing the software, hence the name of the developer tab. Now, besides you adding in the developer tab, you can actually build your own tab that can hold your macros as icons in the ribbon instead of having it as an icon on your spreadsheet. Let's go ahead and run through an example of that. So we need to customize our ribbon again, similar to how we added the developer tab. And how we did that is we went to the File tab. So let's all give a click on File. And let's all scroll all the way down to where we see the options. We're on the Excel options window. Let's all go to the Customize Ribbon tab and give it a click. Now you can actually build your own tab in the ribbon so that you can store your macros in it. I'm going to go ahead and do that by going over to New Tab. Now I'm going to go ahead and highlight the new tab, and you should too, and go ahead and hit Rename. I'm just going to call it My Macros and hit OK. I'm going to go ahead and go to the new group here, and I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it Macros, just the Macros command group, and hit OK. Once I have that tab in play, I now need to put that macro inside of it. So what I do is I go over to the left-hand side of this window. And let's all go ahead and click this arrow and filter for the macros in the workbook. Oh, check that out, my first macro. I'm going to go ahead and add that. I'm going to highlight it and choose Add. And my first macro, I'm going to go ahead and rename it. And I'm going to choose, let's see what's a nice icon. I'm going to build that document. And I'm going to call this Header. And just hit OK. And be sure you have it check marked on. And once you have it check marked on, and you've renamed it, and you added your own special icon, go ahead and hit OK. Now you're going to notice the Macros tab showed up in your ribbon. Let's all go to it. All right, and just like that, you added in the header icon. I'm going to go ahead and select this cell and hit this icon. All right, we just added in our own very custom tab in the ribbon interface. We just put in our own command group and added our own macro to that command group and gave it its own unique icon. Pretty nifty if you ask me. In the previous videos, we went through a full example of a very basic macro and how you can go ahead and record it, save it, edit it, add a button on your spreadsheet, and add a tab to your ribbon, and add a macro to that tab. Now that we understand what a macro can do, I'm pretty sure we're excited about it. I have a little challenge exercise, we'll call it. So I have a spreadsheet here that I want to record myself formatting, because every month I seem to keep getting this spreadsheet, and it's kind of hideous to look at it in this fashion. And I want to organize it to make it more human readable. So every month I get this spreadsheet, and some month I might get it and it's the same exact size. And then some other months I might get it and, well, they have more data into it because I keep pulling it from my database. Now we want to record this macro in a way that it's going to go ahead and adapt to every single spreadsheet that we give it. So if we add more data, less data, this will highlight and format the correct pieces. Let's all go to the Data for Recording sheet and go to our Developer tab. I'm going to be using relative referencing to record this macro. So to start out, I'm going to click on A1 before I hit record, just to keep it clean. And once I'm there, I'm going to hit record. And I'm just going to call it the format macro. And the shortcut is going to be Control-Shift-F for format. And for the description, this will format the spreadsheet regardless of extra columns or newly added rows. All right, I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to start recording. That will be the stop button. Let's do it. So I'm going to format this spreadsheet in cell A1. Let's all go to the Home tab and give it a click. Keep in mind everything's being recorded. And I'm going to go to the cell styles here. And I'm going to make this a title. I'm going to hit enter on my keyboard to go down so I can record that. I'm going to hit enter a few more times to keep going down. And I'm going to hit the tab key to go to the right to go to run date. And for my run date, I'm just going to go ahead and put the date. It's going to be equal today. Open, close paren, and hit enter. Now I'm going to do the ran by. I'm going to put my initials, FK. I'm going to hit enter and enter. Now this is the part that's really important. We want to have this macro record 60 columns of data, or in our case, just 5 columns of data. If you want it to be dynamic in that sense, you need to use the shortcuts to record yourself highlighting the macro. You need to use Control-Shift and to the right, because this is saying highlight the data until the data set stopped. So if you ever added an extra column, it would highlight that column for you. Do the same thing when you record it going down for the rows. So Control-Shift and going down. Once I have that piece, I'm simply going to go to the cell styles again. That's found in the Home tab. And for this one, I'm going to go ahead and make them input. I'm just going to make them input cells here. And once I'm done, I'm going to hold the Control key and hit the Home key. And it'll take me back to A1 just to keep the code nice and clean. And I'm instantly going to go to my Developer tab. And I'm going to stop recording this macro. All right. Let's go ahead and see if this macro worked on data for running. I'm going to click on A1. In case you forgot, the shortcut was Control, Shift, and the letter F for format. Okay, so it was able to format the same spreadsheet of the same size. Let's go ahead and see if it could handle a little more data. I'm going to start out in A1, because that's where the macro will start using relative referencing. And in case you forgot the shortcut, it's Control-Shift-F, but in case you forgot to assign it, you would have to run your macro through the macro library. And notice how the format macro is there, and you just choose run. All right, check that out. It went past the original recording. That's lovely. Let's go ahead and do that last final run for good keeping. Click on A1, and I'm going to use the shortcut this time. I'm going to use Control, Shift, and the letter F, and it recorded that macro. If this does not work, this exercise on the first try, just slow yourself down, delete it, and restart it again, and you'll be in good shape. Macros do take practice, and the key point to getting it right is just taking your time on it and making sure that you know exactly what you want to do before you go and do it.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget we also offer live classes in Office applications, professional development, and private training. Visit learnit.com for more details. Please remember to like and subscribe and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for choosing Learnit.